Welcome to Next Round with me, Dale McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round, and a very happy new year to our watchers and our listeners. On this week's episode, we want to talk about the economic fairy tale that is currently over Australia. David has authored an article in this week's Irish Times, which we want to talk about today, about the property prices that the country has faced over the last number of years, and the possibility of what a correction might look like going forward. Dry January is very much upon us. People will have heard that phrase, dry January, Banuary. But what about a no or low alcohol January with the rise of low and no alcohol drinks? And with dry January very much upon us, we want to talk about what that looks like and what the economics are behind that. And finally, with a new government expected to be formed soon in Ireland, and a new Dáil term starting off as well, we also want to talk about what a new opposition might look like, given the backdrop to the Irish election, which happened on the latter end of last year. If you do like this podcast, please like it, share and subscribe. We're available on all major podcasting platforms, also available on YouTube, where you can watch us there and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. David, a very happy new year to you, and I hope you're well.
Happy New Year to you too, huh? Did you eat too many mince pies?
I did. I actually jumped on the weigh scale this morning and not happy. I'm a little bit more bloated than I thought I was going to be, so like everyone, and I'm excited to talk about one of the segments today on dry January and everyone's attempt to get the calories down. But I had a really good holiday, was back in Ireland for a good part of it as well. Of course, we met up and we had our lovely lunch in Johnny Fox's pub, which was gorgeous food there actually, and it was a gorgeous day and feeling very rested.
Yeah, that was the day that the fog was setting in. It was gorgeous when you were up there, but down in the fog, it was rough going. My New Year's thing, we'll do the alcohol thing later. My New Year's thing is to give up meat, so I'm struggling with that already by day 3. So see how we do by the end of that month. But that's my one.
Okay, that's a big one. But you know what? It's a good one for calorie reduction as well. So we'll check in on you later on in the month and see if you've stuck to that plan.
I'm coping.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, David. Well, let's start with that first topic we want to chat about today, which was Australia's economic fairy tale. And David, I know you published an article in the Irish Times this week, which focused on analysing Australia's economic trajectory. But what a big piece that he's focused on was this prolonged economic prosperity, which is largely driven by the mining sector and its performance in that, may not be sustainable, and there might be a bubble. So yeah, let's dive into that. What did you find out?
Yeah, so the impetus for doing this article, it really goes to the narrative of Irish people going to Australia, right? So this narrative is there for the past couple of years. It's that there's an exodus of young Irish people to Australia, and that part of that narrative is true. There is a record high of young people going, but the narrative is also that it is an exodus of hardship, that young people are going over, drawn by the attractiveness of Australia, but also real hardship in Ireland, that Ireland is a tough place to rent, to work, that our society has many problems, and that you can get a mix of measurably better things in Australia. And I've always been a bit skeptical of that.
Weather being one of them.
The weather, yeah. Like, you'll never deny the weather is better in Australia. Now, even caveating that's assuming you don't get sunburned,
True.
You don't get flooded out of it, because Australia gets torrential rain harder than Ireland does, actually, or you get bitten by a spider or something like that. But no, the point I'm getting to is that the the differences that are spoken about between Ireland and Australia, they focus around a particular cohort of what it means to be young, and that's the young years when you tend to rent, right? And you're in your 20s typically, right? But there's another part of being young, and this is what I'm sure two 30 somethings like you and me, Dale, would say, is that making a country good in your 30s also matters. But what people typically do when they're in their 30s is that they go on to make roots in a community. And the big thing that people tend to do is buy a house. And buying a home in Australia is actually as, if not more difficult to do than it is in Ireland. So house prices in the major Australian cities are a large chunk higher than in Dublin for a comparison. So I use the Demographia housing survey, which looks at major Western cities and looks at the house price as a ratio to incomes. Right.
Yeah.
So where Dublin is at around 4.8. So the price is about 5 times the median household income. If you're in Sydney, the most expensive Australian city, it's over 13. So you're about 2.5 times more expensive in Sydney than in Dublin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a huge multiplying factor. But of course, the other point to call out, David, is that financial institutions and banks will actually will lend more. So the local banking system and mortgage system it kind of factors that in. Is that fair to say?
It does. So if you're buying a home in Australia, the banks will lend up to around 6 times your incomes,
Mm-hmm.
and there's actually some exemptions that will go up near to 7.
Yeah.
Whereas in
First time
Ireland,
buyers, I think, as well, get a bit more leeway in some cases, but yeah.
yeah, in Ireland we have that where where you get 4 times your income as a first time buyer, but second and subsequent purchases would be three and a half
Yeah.
times. So really you're talking about at least 1.5 or even twice the amount of leverage can be got in Australia compared to Ireland. That means that yes, the prices are more than twice as high as in Ireland, but if you've more than twice the borrowing power, that can give you the ability to buy a home. So when you look at the average age of the first time buyer between Ireland and Australia, you're coming in and around the mid 30s. They're roughly the same. The challenge though I see is that yes, you can attain a home at around a similar pace in life in Australia versus Ireland, but in Australia you're going to be a debt slave. You're going to have way higher repayments, and you're at risk of the home being in a mortgage situation for longer. That's harder to pay the mortgage back and retire with some space in your 50s and 60s to actually build up a pension pot. And that to me is a much more stressed and difficult situation to be in. So that's a real difference that I don't think a lot of people focus on when they think about the comparison between Ireland and Australia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is all very. It's similar to me, as you know, David. I lived in Toronto for a number of years. The Canadian economy very similar to the Australian commodity-driven currency economy as well. Very similar price to income ratio on homes. Close to 13, about 12.8%. Price to income ratio. So, but so that affordability factor now, of course, they would also lend at a higher higher multiplier of your annual salary to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
But interestingly, mortgage terms are actually less. Mortgage terms, so no, in the UK and Ireland, you can get a mortgage, 35, 40 years in some cases. Max Canada just changed it from 25 to 30 quite recently. I'm actually not sure what Australia is.
Yeah, I didn't put a number in the article, but I did look it up just recently, and I think it comes in around the same as Ireland in the kind of 25, 30 year range.
And it's an interesting piece, David, because I think what you might have is, so let's say there are a lot of young Irish people who go abroad, go to Australia, with this promise of higher incomes, chance of buying somewhere, maybe not thinking of being a debt slave right away, but just kind of want to get on the property ladder. And these things are 20, 30 years down the line, I don't need to think about that. Um, but then let's say they come to this realization, later on in their late 20s, early 30s. And one of the challenges, I think, that is when they want to come back home then, well,
Mm.
then kind of they're further delayed again because oftentimes then to get a mortgage you have to be in a stable job for 3 years. You have to have a localized economic presence in Ireland, and then if you want to buy a home then in Ireland, you're further delayed again after coming to that realization. So we kind of have probably a bit of a lost generation of people who have been going from continent to continent wanting to buy a home, and in the end not being able to.
Yeah, I think there's a real challenge for people to kind of like stage their lives in a particular way. And I think all young people do this. We're all trying to figure out as the years and decade or so goes by what order and in which pace you're going to do certain things. And that could be, yes, the renting versus buying thing. It can be finding a romantic partner. It can be deciding whether to get married or not. It can be moving in together. It can be going on to have kids and family. Put your kids in creche and school, and all of these milestones then come along for your children. All of that requires an alignment of milestones that if you don't align them properly, the delay in one can push back all the others. So you could find yourself actually heavily delayed on all. It could really be quite disruptive for your life, in the real kind of a fulfilled life kind of sense. If you don't get the staging of these things accurately, you're right then about having to then potentially move back to Ireland. Like I'll never forget a meeting I had like 7 or 8 years ago with a guy who was a mortgage broker, and he actually specializes in Irish abroad, trying to purchase properties back home.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd be dealing with people in Abu Dhabi, yes, Australia, Canada, other places. And this was 2017, 18. Like this wasn't rich. This like the peaking property. There's still there's more people abroad, arguably now, but really he was dealing with the wave of people who were abroad during the recession, right? So you had the '08 crash, people went abroad, but then really were trying to come back. But there was enough business of people outside coming in that this guy could make it a speciality, which I thought was just fascinating. There is a lot of people trying to do this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I took a look at the numbers as well, on on people on Irish and Canada coming back
Mm.
home, and the numbers leaving was about 3,000 last year. The number returning was 6,000, so it's a net inflow coming back into the country, and I think many of them will be facing that challenge. And if we turn then to the risk here, in terms of, let's say, take Australia, David. This is bubble is the word which comes to mind in all of this. And what level of risk do you think Australia is facing as a bubble here? The Irish, we're very sensitive to putting so much of our efforts and focus on property, and how some of these countries over the last 10 years have really placed so much emphasis on their own personal wealth creation in property. And of course, everyone else who are coining it from that, I think every
Mm.
second person, certainly in Canada, they were either a real estate agent or, living off the ever increasing situation that was property
Yeah.
in these
Are
countries.
these the people who have like realtor in their bio and they sell like two homes a year?
Yeah.
This kind of
Well,
American thing.
yeah, but also just like, if you're thinking of your side hustle,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
good side.
This guy's also an Uber driver slash realtor slash. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's one that's can be quite easy to get into depending on the country. Now, again, some countries it's regulated and it's licensed and all that, but in other countries it's not. Like in the UK, for example, I think anyone can
Mm,
become a real estate agent.
mm,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but
So
risk, yeah,
this,
bringing
yeah,
the conversation back to
no, no, I
risk,
get
yeah,
you. Yeah, so the risk is, I'll explain it this way. The OECD look at levels of household debt
yeah,
relative to incomes, right? So again, we're talking about these things compared to incomes, because saying that debt is high doesn't mean anything unless you can compare it to something. Uh, Ireland and Australia we turned the millennium, the late 90s, 2000s, with about 100% of household debt as a ratio to incomes. And that
Is
that
that good
really
or bad?
wasn't that's not a bubble.
Okay.
That's not a bubble. But we grew together throughout the 2000s to reach around 200% relative to income. So we doubled. That's a doubling of debt relative to incomes. That was very much a bubble. We know it's a bubble because Ireland's burst, and we ended up with a very tragic outcome from that. Australia's bubble didn't burst. It was inflated at the same time as ours, but it's just kept going. Now, you might say, well, because they've kept it going for 20, 30 years, where's the risk of it bursting? Surely they've just figured out something better, a better way to manage it, something like that. I think that elevated level of debt, like is there in Australia, it's there in Canada, and some other places, will need to correct at some point. I was careful in this article not to put a timeline on it because I think that when Australia has this very unique setup where the mining industry, they just have so many natural resources
Yeah.
and they can sell them on global markets, and they've the nickname of being China's quarry. And even though China has slowed down a bit, that hasn't had any hit to Australia, certainly not to their property market. So this could continue for another while yet. But if, for example, you have a Trump administration coming in, puts a lot of heavy tariffs, China slows down more, suddenly the demand for natural resources isn't there, you've got ricochet after ricochet, the dominoes fall, and then that could lead to an adverse scenario in the Australian property market. And that could catch a couple of Irish people out there who moved over for work, decided to stay, put down their roots, and then ended up in some form of negative equity.
Mm-hmm.
I would not like to see that happen to some of our our fellow Irish out there. So I thought it was worth writing that piece to put that out there. It could be another 10 years, it could be 20 more years of that bubble staying high. But it's something that people need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and it's in the context as well of the whole immigration debate. Like I know in Canada, for example, one of again very similar economies, it didn't really have a bubble burst. The banking system largely survived well and resisted the global financial crisis back in 2008. But one of the things they've been subjected to has been such high immigration into core core areas and cities within the country, and that's and like a million people coming into the country, for example, and the population increasing over 1-2% each year. So a lot of people, not enough building, and that's almost kind of keeping it going as well. Do you think that's in Australia? Is that a similar situation? Because they're more controlled, though. I found Australia is a lot more controlled on its immigration system.
Yeah, Australia is certainly strict, all right, and Ireland has done well because they're not strict with countries that they know and have a history with. I mean, there were Irish prisoners shipped out to Australia when it was all part of the empire, right? So there is that historic link there that has kept good terms. It means that when the Irish rock up looking for a 1 year working holiday visa, it's a pretty quick admission. But they have also admitted wider numbers of people from wider countries, and there's now been a kind of a new records hit on their inward migration numbers. But there is now a political mood to kind of curtail that as well. In fact, they have put in measures to curtail it. So that will take some of the heat out of their rental and property markets. Particularly the rental market has been quite hot in the Australian cities in recent times. And then the property market, that's the one. I don't think a slowdown in migration on its own would do it. You need something more
Probably a
drastic
few things, yeah.
you need something more drastic than that. You'd really need a recession, like Ireland saw, because Ireland's was a recession as well as a slowdown, as a crash in property. These two things tend to go together.
Yeah, and I think the wider question of, well, why are Irish people moving to Australia? Because you're right, like the numbers have significantly upticked since COVID, and if you think back to the early 2010s, you had the rental crisis getting worse and worse, lack of economic opportunity. So people had to go somewhere, and lots went to Australia. Now, you look at the rental crisis, it's starting to get there, affordability is starting to get there, and it's becoming a bit more of a positive story. But then I wonder, is this also kind of a post-COVID thing, David, where people just want to, they see, I think Australia is well advertised, and it's been the it's been the subject of good advertising of being a great country. I'm not sure about you, David, but I see on Instagram so many people, my Irish friends, who are on Bondi Beach a lot, and I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, it's raining again, and
yeah,
it's dark at 3:30. Great, it's kind of like that dream of, oh well, maybe actually this could be a good place to try out.
yeah. So the most common ages when you look at this working holiday visa program of
Hmm.
young Irish going over are ages 24, 5,
Yeah,
6, so the mid 20s, right? But wind the clock back 5 years. Where were these people when they were 21 and 2, right? These people were locked down during COVID. This is the generation that couldn't do their first and second year in-person lectures. They couldn't go out to the pub and meet their fellow college
yeah,
friends. This is the generation that has a massive pent-up desire for not just social interaction, but for seeing the world.
yeah,
And what better way to not just see parts of the world, but also see their fellow young people than all go to Australia, where that Instagram kind of lure has been portraying this great big party that's out there. I don't blame people for going
no,
over. I think people are going to come back really enriched, having lived and worked in a different part of the world. And I think they'll be a great addition to Ireland when they come back. But I call this boomerang emigration because most of them come back.
yeah, fascinating. Okay, well, on that note, let's shift gears to our topic.
We're yeah, we're going to talk about not partying,
Yeah,
right?
this is
No, well, not
this is the
it's the low alcohol.
yeah. Well, not to say, David, that you can't party without alcohol, or
Well,
with alcohol.
yeah, I was almost saying that in my head as I said the first thing
Yeah,
because this is where this is the yeah
and
yeah
we're in we
you
are in dry January right now, and want to encourage people, if they do want to partake in dry January, that they're most welcome to do so, and they'll have a great time. But there are options for you. And one thing, David, which I want to call out, has been a recent study by Heineken, the alcohol company, and also the University of Oxford, which has revealed that 68% of consumers have tried alcohol-free alternatives, and 80% believe that their consumption is more acceptable than it was 5 years ago. All of this, of course, is about social pressures and the influences that choosing alcoholic beverages in social settings has become a bit more easy to do so. Now, the research was based on around 12,000 adults across the UK, US, Spain, Japan, and Brazil, and it found that 50% of annual alcohol consumers admit to drinking alcohol at social occasions despite wanting to opt for non-alcoholic options. And of course, this suggests that societal expectations and peers are influencing them still, and those elements play a big part in people's decisions. And if we look as well, the study also highlights challenges such as pricing, taste expectations, social factors, particularly among Gen Z, who experience more social pressure. But despite all of that, and those challenges as well, this is a market that is increasing. And the market for no and low alcohol drinks is expanding, with Heineken capturing about 80% of the global market share. So those are some of the main elements, David. But one thing I want to particularly highlight, kind of zone in on, has been Guinness Zero. And I
yeah
know we had a pint of Guinness Zero in our lunch over the holidays. But I was kind of doing some research into it, and I'm not sure for listeners and watchers if you've had one. I mean, certainly the Guinness Zero on draft to me is basically the exact same as having a regular a Guinness. And I was looking into kind of the process, and it's a more complex process to do it. It takes about 2 days longer in order to complete the process. They use a cold filtration system to extract and remove the alcohol, but it's the same process used to create regular Guinness. Just they add on a piece around the end of it. So And then if you look actually on the performance of Guinness Zero, um, so Guinness has experienced, I think, an overwhelming success in this area. Guinness Zero Zero Draft experienced a 48% increase in volume on sales between February 23 and February 24. Um, a result of this is that Diageo, the owner of Guinness, they've announced an additional 30 million euro to expand production capacity of Guinness Zero in their Dublin brewery. But crucially, Guinness Zero now accounts for 3% of the brand's total sales globally.
Wow, wow, yeah. The growth there is huge. It really is, and it like there's a couple of trends which have kind of come along. Things like drink driving laws have basically just killed off anyone being able to drive out and back to social events now if you want to have a drink. So there is the thing of, well, we need a drink to give to the driver, and that used to be getting a soft drink. But the zero beers have really come in and almost kind of tapped into that social pressure idea that, well, you're not getting a soft drink, are you? Are you on antibiotics or that kind of stuff that would historically be said. But actually, if you can have a pint, it actually makes you feel a little more in line with the others who are drinking. I know that's maybe kind of giving way in a way to the to the social pressure side of it. But yeah, the growth's huge. It's hard now to find a pub which doesn't have Guinness Zero on tap. They're
Yeah.
actually advertising that they're getting so many pubs to adopt it. But I know when I think of Londondale, I think of where you are. I'm just thinking of the surge in interest in Guinness in general, because this was a big Christmas trend that the Diageo was supposedly you know rationing it,
That's
right?
right.
And but I would imagine within that the growth in the zero form of Guinness, like you may also see a surge in Guinness Zero being on tap in London at some point as well. If the Guinness flows first, then the zero seems to follow.
Yeah, well, and it's, I mean, why has it been so successful? I think, well, first of all, on Guinness in general, it's reached it's basically reached TikTok, and the whole idea of
Yeah.
splitting the G and that has gained prominence. But you definitely are seeing a rise in Guinness Zero, and there's a pub in Soho here in London called the Devonshire, which basically sells the most amount of Guinness pints in London, and does a very good job at doing so. But they've been quoted recently as reflecting on the performance of Guinness Zero. They have it on draft there as well, and they've said that it is doing phenomenally well. Interestingly, on price, it's about 30 pence cheaper, which isn't actually always the case depending on where you go. And people haven't really commented on it at all. And actually, I think people are willing to pay the same price that a regular alcoholic drink would have, and actually not have it and just enjoy the experience. But I was thinking, David, as to with this rise of no and low alcohol, I think across many generations, why has this been the case? And if I think as to why, financial considerations, I'm not sure that really ties in. Certainly on beer, the price is basically the same as a regular alcoholic drink. That said, if you look at wines can be significantly cheaper actually than their alcoholic peers. Same with gins and that sort of stuff as well. If you look at nightclubs, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before, but the nightclub industry has been, I think, just decimated over the last decade, and is ever shrinking. And we're also seeing that as well in pubs. I know pubs have been closing at their fastest rate here in the UK than since the recession about 12 years ago. But I think also there's another piece around this, which is wellness. And from physical wellness to mental wellness, there's speaking of calories, there's a calorie impact as well. A pint of Guinness Zero, about 75 calories compared to your what, 300 calories per regular
Yeah,
Guinness. So
and you'll drink fewer of them
yeah,
in a night.
and drink fewer of them. So
Yeah,
so maybe that actually ties into the into the financial consideration piece as
yeah.
well. But
I once read a book, right? So I there was a time when I thought I wasn't going to drink alcohol for the rest of my life. I
okay,
just had a bad stomach for a couple of months, and I thought that alcohol and some other things were causing harm, and I kind of had to get used to that, and I figured, oh gosh, I'll have to no longer drink for the rest of my life. So I started to get a book, which actually was kind of an argument against alcohol, and this was my way of getting comfortable with alcohol no longer being in my life. Well, it is back, but the book was arguing just every part of your body is taking a hit with alcohol. It affects your liver, it affects your heart, your high risk of heart disease. Your mental health will be worse even with moderate amounts. Like they've struggled to find in large studies any moderate amount of alcohol that is actually in any way beneficial, and even moderate amounts can have small health hits to you in the round. So yeah, the wellness thing, it's no surprise that is coming along.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think as well um there's a big piece here on, if you make it available, people will choose it. And I think this is the exact. I think the proof is in the performance that the likes of Heineken Zero, the likes of Guinness Zero, if you make a great product that is regularly available to consumers wherever they want to go, um, they might opt for it. You know, I mean, who knows? Has this been like? Could this be a floodgate where so many people have wanted to do this, especially as they get older in life, when the hangovers go from a couple of hours to a couple of days, that they would
Yeah.
rather,
Yeah.
if push came to shove and they had the choice, the data again in the piece of research which I called out at the start of this segment speaks to it, that if they weren't facing a peer pressure, would they opt for the non-alcoholic version? And I think the answer to that is probably yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So we may well get to the point where, I don't know, pubs become almost majority zero instead of majority alcoholic places. I'm a little dubious of that one though. Just
Same.
thinking about what I said about how many drinks actually get consumed. I mean, if pubs are a venue now where people only go for one or two zero drinks instead of five or six, alcoholic drinks, as much as I know it maybe shouldn't laugh at that side of it, considering what I just said about the health side of it.
Well,
But like
it's reality.
yeah, but like that actually could really crush the business model of many pubs. Like what I'm interested in actually is just in, as you mentioned, a zero beer is a little bit less on price. Like the breakout of what you're paying for is probably quite different with a zero, even though they're similar prices. So because you said that the process is a little longer, there's probably a bit more
Yeah.
cost.
So because I've been fascinated by this and I've been looking into it. So the process is longer,
Yeah.
because you basically have to make the beer as a regular beer, and then you have to
Mm.
extract it, and
Yeah.
you have to extract the alcohol, and that's the key part, because that can basically corrupt the taste. So
Mm.
often, I mean, if you think a couple of years ago, you'd really struggle to find a non-alcoholic beer that was actually in any way decent. Won't name names. Won't besmirch certain brand names here. But the likes of Guinness, what they did was they really invested in the technology, and with this new cold extraction system that they have, they're able to take the alcohol out over a longer process, 2 days longer, but retain that creamy, beautiful flavor. By the way, we are not sponsored by Guinness. Before I go any
Yeah.
further, though we're open to it. If anyone's listening, let us know.
Yeah. Dale, you're head of
Head of
advertising for the
advertising,
podcast. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Brand
Yeah.
deals are welcome. But it retains that taste. Now, the other thing as well, what makes it more expensive is actually there is a safety element to this as well. So let's say pipes. The pipes in pubs need to be cleaned, right? So
Mm.
oftentimes for regular beer, you'd clean the pipes every 2 weeks or so. Really have to keep cleaning them every week on the non-alcoholic kegs, because they build the bacteria and can corrupt the
Yeah.
pints as well. So there's a higher maintenance cost as well.
Yeah, okay. So there's a little bit of cost a little bit of extra cost to the producer, a little bit of maybe extra cost to the pub, but then taxes. It's no taxes. It's not alcohol, right?
Yeah, well, I actually well, so this is the funny thing, right? So you'll notice I said no or low alcohol. Um,
Mm,
and then this is actually a regulation piece. Actually, lots of zero alcohol beers in certain countries, while they say they're zero, they're actually not zero. They're about
mm,
0.5% volume.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but certain
Yeah.
countries have very strict regulations where if it has to be zero to be zero.
Mm.
While actually lots of non-alcoholic beers are low alcohol.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, you'd have to have 10 of them for it to be equivalent to one or something
yeah,
like
and even
that.
then again, because it's so low, it'll by the time you consume more,
Yeah,
you're more in Listerine, I think, than you have in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And who goes on a session of 10 non-alcoholic pints anyway?
Might be the new thing. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. That could be next year, Dale. We'll do 12
Yeah,
non-alcoholic
yeah,
pubs
exactly. Yeah,
for
and we'll
Christmas.
remember everything, and we had a great time.
Yeah, yeah. And we can drive between them safely.
Yeah, do it in different counties.
Oh gosh,
That's an
yeah,
idea.
yeah.
That's an idea. So look, I think we just wanted to. I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about, especially in January, and we're seeing this really take a bit of upward trajectory as well. So curious to see how that develops over the course of the next while. But let's shift gears again, David, and with January brings a new Dáil term as well, and of course this is on the back of Ireland had its general election in December, a new government to be confirmed, but the new government consisting of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and whoever might be on the independent side make up forming the next government. So with the government pretty much bringing clarity to the situation, one question I think I want to turn to, David, is around the opposition and what might the
Hmm.
opposition look like. Um, and how we go from there.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a it's a while since we had the election. Things have gone
I
quiet,
know
but
it's
they're going to
been like I
get
mean it's been over a month, right?
yeah, yeah, and we've kind of got used to these long government formation
Yeah,
periods. But it was also down to the fact that Christmas fell in between.
did.
Now, if you go back to the 90s, I think it was the Fianna Fáil Labour coalition. I think they had it was an autumn election. One of those elections was autumn, and they got something done by Christmas, kind of thing. And we kind of almost know how this one's going to go. But yeah, the opposition interests me because um, the thing that I've pointed out before is that the mix of so the last opposition was heavily Sinn Féin with some smaller parties in there. The next opposition is going to be, yes, Sinn Féin and centre left, but with a much different ratio. So you're going to have a doubling. You have a doubling now of the Labour Soc Dem bloc. The Greens have just gone to nothing, but they're not on the government side either. And Sinn Féin came in with similar-ish number of seats. So you're going to have a much more vocal centre-left bloc. And because some of the independents are rowing in to support the government, it's not that they can't say things or be themselves, because a lot of them will,
It'll
but
be quieter.
they they're a little quieter. Yeah, they're going to have to talk to the government on certain things first, because they'll just have other CDs turning around and say, "Well, you support the government. What are you
Yeah,
doing about
yeah.
this?" And I did a bit of work just looking. This was the night of the first counts and everything, thinking during them that we were going to have either Soc Dems or Labour going in, because some of the early first counts gave us certainty of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, but no certainty on what the numbers needed to bridge the gap were. We now know that only independents are needed, but if it had been Soc Dem Labour, I wanted to go in and figure out what kind of policies would be needed. So I made a list and I looked through both Soc Dem and Labour and discovered that all these following policies are actually in both parties' manifestos. So things like a right to housing referendum, water and public ownership, again, a referendum, increasing the number of bank holidays, a rent freeze, hate
Oh,
speech laws, removing faith formation
I
from
said I, I
schools.
said I said oh on bank holidays, by the way.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Yeah,
I look, who doesn't love a bank holiday,
no, it's
right? I
great.
mean, everyone longs for them. It's
Yeah,
January, so okay, maybe that's one that the new government will adopt. Who
yeah.
knows? But things like a citizens' assembly on education,
Hmm.
assisted dying, gender transition from age 16, banning conversion therapy, 40% gender quotas at local elections, furthering gender pay gap reporting, removing faith formation from schools. There's a whole bunch of policies out there that are going to get more of a vocal voice now that there is the centre left bloc in the Dáil. But really, you're going to have a centre left bloc, a left wing bloc. There'll be two A and two TDs in there now. That's a doubling, but like 1 to 2 does really nothing. And then any of the kind of, let's call it, right coded people or the kind of center right, they'll all be in the government. And I'm almost going to use the word again. And it is going to be, I think, a government where the only surprises that they can do in a way are kind of leftward, because that's where the pressure is going to come from. It's going to come from a leftward position. So I'll be really interested to see what they do in the program for government, because if it, whatever is there may only end up getting pivoted leftward, whatever they decide. So if they want to do anything that pivots rightward, they'd have to put it in the government program for government soon.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the other piece as well that was on my mind was, let's say, so you have Sinn Féin, so that's going to be more populist, you might say. You got on the left voice and benches, you're going to have Soc Dems and Labour. But then this piece, which I think is increasing, more across Europe and the UK, and this right wing voice.
Yeah.
Is that a missing voice? Like Ain 2, I think, have tapped into these issues. And I'm when I say right, by the way, I mean I'm talking about kind of those issues around kind of anti-culture war, immigration, those kind of real hot ticket items. Who'll be speaking to those?
Well, yeah, it'll be the two ANTTDs and very few else.
Mm-hmm.
Sinn Féin will be interesting though, because Sinn Féin have gotten divided, split down the middle by some of these issues, and Sinn Féin has a good amount of internal party discipline, but they have lost TDs before. They lost Peadar Tóibín and Carol Nolan. That's why we now have Aon to.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to see if they can actually hold everyone together and what their message will be on some of these things. And yeah, across Europe, things are tilting rightwards. I mean, if I was to call the next French presidential election in 27, which we can now say is 2 years away, I'd be saying that the default presumption is that it goes to Marine Le Pen. Britain now looks to be kind of tilting rightward, more so that Labour are tilting downward, but that's still something, and we tend to take our lead from our nearest neighbour, and we also tend to take our lead from the US, where we've just had this big Trump win. And
Canada as well, about to go centre right, I would say, but Conservative Party will romp home in the election this year.
Yeah. And the CDU are going to be back in Germany probably later this year, and then in Australia that'll be back to the Liberals, away from Labour. So again, a kind of a pivot back to the right.
So there'll be a single term for Labour then in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah. And they only do 3-year terms in Australia. That was in my article. So that's Anthony Albanese going back up for election there. But all of this. The part of the politics, though, I don't think that will be so quickly adopted in Ireland, is the kind of the nationalist element to this, because when Trump starts to do his tariffs, other groups need to retaliate. If it's the EU, if it's Britain, if it's China, if even it's Japan or somewhere else, Canada or Mexico, if people start putting up tariffs, if one puts up a tariff, you kind of need to retaliate. Then you start to put walls essentially between trade, between your different blocks. Ireland's perspective on that is going to have to be overwhelmingly against that. So we, in the entirety of the Dáil, you're probably going to see much more caution towards any sort of nationalism because of how reliant our economy is on global trade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we have President Trump being inaugurated in 17 days, I think. So it's and I think we'll see a lot of action actually in the first couple of days as well, as to what will he be doing and what will that economic policy be.
It's the things like Trump is going to go big on migration, for example.
Yeah.
that's one that there's going to be, I think, a continued rightward lean on
And
that
we've seen,
across.
and we've seen that in particular in Ireland. It's I think there's a realization now across the big parties that look, this needs to be a bit more um,
Yeah,
regimented. Um,
yeah, common sense, firm on migration, I think is that the phrase that Simon Harris has used.
yeah,
That kind of stuff is going to be needed. But you're going to have some big culture stuff is going to emerge out of the US too. Like there's some sort of micro debates that I'm seeing that I don't want to call them micro debates, but like things like assisted dying in the UK and cousin marriage that came up in the UK
yeah. Because
recently.
marriage is one. Yeah, you're because so
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and okay, I look, I have not looked into cousin marriage in Ireland. I don't know what our current situation is on that
Yeah.
one. But
Is
the
there
point being,
is there a new vocabulary of culture wars we need to learn, David? A volume two.
see, this is the problem with the culture war.
Yeah,
This just when you
keeps
think
going
you've
on.
understood one issue,
Yeah,
new language emerges, and you need to understand a new topic. But when if there's another 5 years of these topics emerging, where's going to be the common
yeah,
sense voice from the opposition?
yeah,
That's actually where I see there's openings.
yeah,
There's an opening for people on the opposition benches to actually kind of, speak out against these things if the government isn't on the ball on them.
yeah.
And that's,
And like we've seen like a real we've seen the growth in the Soc Dems and Labour as well. Both parties did quite well, and now form pretty sizable block. If both of them can continue to perform well, obviously their message is resonating. They can
hmm,
and they continue to kind of push forward their agenda. They can actually make real gains again at the consequence of Sinn Féin.
yeah. And that's where I think the government's best play in all of this is to actually, so there's firm on migration is one that I would say the government should do this: be firm on migration and cautious on culture. And if you do both of those things, that will lead Soc Dems Labour to be your main opponent on them, and Sinn Féin will be left behind.
Yeah,
That would be my advice to them on it.
and then actually you start to have that real realignment then of Irish politics between traditionally left and traditionally right. Though the world is moving on, I think, beyond traditional left and right. I think Ireland would be a bit more on a catch-up case. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
those words are increasingly harder to actually
yeah,
know exactly what they mean because the right code of people in the US now don't want automated working. They don't want to automated trucks, for example. Tucker Carlson's against that. They now have union people speaking at the
that's
Republican
right.
National
Teamsters, yeah,
Convention. Yeah, Teamsters, and giving higher wages is kind of just fine for both parties now.
hmm,
And that's what Brexit was partly about as well.
yeah,
So what it means to be left and right is also changing.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, fascinating stuff and a lot to cover on our first episode back this year, David. But on that note, I think we'll leave it there. So again, thank you everyone for listening and watching. If you did like this podcast, we would ask, new year, give us a new like, give us a new share to your friends and your followers, but also subscribe to us. We're available on all major podcast platforms, also on YouTube, where you can watch our YouTube channel. Subscribe to us there and like some of our videos as well. We'll be back next week with more on Next Round. But until then, thanks for watching and take care.